What's up guys, welcome back. In today's video, I'm gonna go over 5 safety tips to be aware of before you hit the jetty. Now this is by no means a complete list of things to look out for while you're out there, but these are 5 important things that I've noticed over the years in my past experience of fishing jetties, be it day or night. So tip number 1, make sure you have corkers or cleats or something with studs underneath it to walk along the jetty. There are many different versions you can buy. I just went with the ones that strap onto the bottom of my shoes. But whatever you go with, just make sure you have them because the rocks might not look slippery, but trust me, they are. And also keep in mind that even when you do have these on you, some of the greener seaweed covered rocks, there's still a chance you're gonna slip on them. So my advice from my experience with using cleats or corkers or whatever you decide to go with would be to stick to the same places you would normally go on the jetty. They don't make you invincible and you can certainly still slip with them, and we don't want that to happen. So grab yourself a pair of something to grip those rocks with before you head out there. Tip number 2, keep track of the tide and know how the tide affects that particular jetty. Not only are we going to want to keep track of the tide to track the bites and the movement of the fish around the structure, but we're also not going to want to get stuck out there in the middle of high tide, 12:30 at night. Now, the way this can happen is sometimes the front of a jetty, there'll be rocks on the end that you're going to stand on that are higher than the rest, and all of a sudden you turn around, the tide's risen 2 feet, and if you don't have like waders on or something, it's going to be kind of tough to get back. That's happened to me a couple of times, and I just had to roll up my pants and walk back. Now, it wasn't a huge deal, but if you're in an area with a lot of current, or let's say you're fishing a moon tide, it's going to be higher than normal, and it's certainly going to have more force to it. You're not going to want to have to get stuck out there walking through that because that can be very dangerous. So monitor the tides, and before you ever fish a jetty at night, spend a lot of time out there during the day getting to know it. And while you're out there during the day, keep track of how the tide affects the jetty. Also mark that down in your journal because perhaps you can fish the high tide during a half moon, but once it gets to full moon, you went out there during the day and you noticed, hey, it's way too high. I'm not going to make it back through that current. So keep track of those things and mind the tide. Tip number 3, check the forecast ahead of time. That's another thing that you should be doing. Over time, if you don't already, you're going to realize the correlation between wind direction and whether or not you have fish in front of you in a given location. But another thing to keep track of, this kind of ties in with the one before, is let's say you have the normal tide going out and it's normally safe, but let's say there's a 15-20 mile an hour wind that day. Well, there might be waves crashing over the jetty when the water gets high enough, and certainly I've been there as well, and again, that's not fun to get stuck in. Also, the wind is going to make it more difficult to walk back through that water. Another thing to keep track of, especially where I am, especially June and July, where it seems like we get thunderstorms out of nowhere. Definitely keep track of that as well, especially if you're fishing a larger jetty. I was fishing one 5 years ago actually, and this is like a 300-foot jetty. This thing was enormous, and my friends and I were all the way at the end of it, and there was like rain far off in the distance, and we kind of thought nothing of it. We're like, all right, whatever, but we didn't check the forecast ahead of time, and there happened to be lightning in that system as well. So we managed to get back in time, but as the lightning was getting closer and closer. So definitely keep that in mind, especially like any jetty you're on, because you can't walk as fast on that thing as you can on dry land or even on sand for that matter. So definitely keep track of the weather forecast for how it's going to affect your commute to and from the jetty, and don't get stuck out there in lightning. Tip number 4 and tip number 5 kind of tie together, but we're going to start with number 4. And that's something I always make sure I do, and I notice some other people don't do this, and it kind of scares me. Always look behind you before you cast, because you don't know how well everyone else is paying attention to you. You don't know if anybody else is aware, so it always helps to just look behind you before you swing the rod. Also, like sometimes people bring their kids out on the jetty, which obviously I don't really think is a good idea, but sometimes they do it anyway, and kids certainly aren't always paying attention either. So always look behind you before you cast. That ties in well with tip number 5, which is to be aware of what the people around you are doing. There was one time where I was out on the jetty and I was just casting, fishing away, and someone came up on the jetty and he was about 40 feet away from me, and I wasn't really paying attention to him, which I should have, because then I would have noticed that, you know, he was newer, but he really didn't know how to cast properly. He was casting one direction, it was going in another. And 20 minutes later, I have the lure hit me in the back and get stuck in my jacket. And if I was paying attention to what he was doing, I would have been aware that that's something I should be concerned with. So it might seem kind of like a lot of extra work to keep track of the people around you, but when there's hooks flying around you, it's definitely worth putting that extra time in to be aware of what's going on. So that's it, guys. 5 safety tips to take with you when you head out on the jetty. And above all, just trust your instincts. If you're out there or you're thinking of going out there and something just doesn't feel right, stick to the beach. Usually, if you're on a sand beach and there's a jetty, you can fish the sides of the jetty from the sand beach anyway, so if it doesn't feel safe, you're not totally going to miss out. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more videos like this one, and I'll catch you next time.